Hey, it's Yay for Yarn, and today I'm reviewing some of the stainless steel lace knitting needles from the Knitter's Pride Mindful Collection. So, the Mindful Collection is a brand new collection from Knitter's Pride. It includes a bunch of different types of items, and what I have here before me is the tote bag, which is a really nice thick quality canvas, and several of the knitting needles that are available in the collection. Now, all of these items from the Mindful Collection were sent to me from Laurel Hill Online, where you can order all kinds of knitting needles, crochet hooks. There's so many different kinds of knitting and crochet tools and notions on there. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of products, and they have a great selection. And before we get on with the review, I just wanted to let you know that the Mindful Collection items are currently available from Laurel Hill. Visit the link in the description box down below, where I will link to the Mindful Collection that is available at Laurel Hill. And like I said, knitting needles are not the only items in the collection. They have other notions as well. They even have complete sets of knitting needles. But I have a few here that I've just been playing around with and testing out to compare to the other needles that I have and just see how they feel and how they perform when you're knitting. So I also have, besides knitting needles, I also have this lovely tote bag, which has lots of great pockets on the inside, and it's made of a very thick, stiff, durable canvas. As you can see, there's pockets in here, lots of pockets here, and a big zipper pouch right there. So this will definitely be great for toting projects around. It has a magnetic snap at the top and some very sturdy straps. And then there are also these lovely little drawstring pouches that are made of, I guess it's like a muslin material. It's like a just like a thin woven cotton, and these are little drawstring bags. I even have a very large one over here, and those are part of the collection as well. But the main thing that we want to look at is the knitting needles. So I'm going to just momentarily move the bags out of the way. They're very nice bags, but mostly right now we are reviewing the knitting needles so that you can get an idea of what the needles themselves are like, because that's the most important part. So first off, I have two different needles here. This one right here is a US 8 5mm fixed circular knitting needle. So by fixed circular, that means that the cable does not come unattached from the needle tip. And that means that it is not an interchangeable needle. The ones that I have over here, this is an interchangeable needle, where that the cable, or this flexible length that all the stitches normally sit on, the cable is a separate piece from the needle tip, and you can take the tip of the needle part off and attach different lengths of cables to it. So as you can see, it screws off of the cable, and then you have the option to attach the same size needle tip to a longer or shorter cable if you need to, which is very, very handy. I use mostly interchangeable circular needles for most of my projects, not because there's anything wrong with straight needles, but because I prefer circular needles over straight needles. And the reason that I prefer them is because I don't like to have all the length of a straight knitting needle sticking out and wiggling around as I'm knitting. And a circular knitting needle works just as great for working back and forth in rows as it does for working in the round. So first of all, I just want to show you real quick some of the features of the steel needles from the Mindful Collection, and then we'll compare them real quick to some of my other existing needles that I already have in my stash, and show you how they are alike and different to some other brands of needles that I also use. So these needles are made of stainless steel. And I have tried a stainless steel needle before, which I will show you in a minute, and I didn't love it. So I was pleasantly surprised when I tried these, because one of the most important things to me in a knitting needle is the surface, the actual surface of the needle. And mainly for me, it's because I really like to knit quickly and efficiently, and I like to work pretty fast. So I don't really like to use needles that have a lot of grip. So bamboo, for example, especially if it's like a bamboo that doesn't have a coating on it, a lot of bamboo needles have a lot of grip. They have like a very faint surface texture to them just because they're made of wood and they don't have a coating most of the time. So they don't allow the stitches to slide as freely as needles of other materials. So that is why I generally use laminated birch, which I'll show you in a minute, because they have a lot of slipperiness to the surface of the wood. But these have a lot of slipperiness to them as well. The other steel knitting needles that I had tried before were not this slick, and I will show you those in a minute. So I really do like the slick feeling of this needle. Actually, both of these, because they both feel about the same. But it just allows the stitches to glide across them more smoothly, more quickly. There's not as much friction, and that is one thing that I love about these needles, is that there is not very much friction. So for this fixed needle, this is a lace needle, and a lace needle means that it has a longer, more tapered point to it. So I will explain more about that in a second and compare that to the other needles that I have that are just regular tip needles. But I really did appreciate the lace tip needles. I've never tried lace tip needles, but because it is more tapered and it has like a longer section where that it slowly tapers in, whereas it's on regular needles, the taper doesn't start till further closer to the tip. That taper allows it to slide in and out of multiple stitches more easily. So if you're working decreases, particularly lace, because lace netting has a lot of decreases, if you're working decreases, it makes it so much easier to slide it into multiple stitches at the same time. I was actually really surprised at how much of a difference that makes, especially when you are used to working lace on regular tip needles. That really does help a lot to be able to insert it into the stitch easier when you're working with 2 or 3 stitches at the same time. So before we get into the other needle that I've got here, I wanted to show you the cable. And the cable here is very flexible and pliable. And this is one thing I haven't seen on any knitting needle before, is a cable that is marked. So here it says this is a stainless steel needle with a cable, 24 inches long, which means that the entire needle from tip to tip is 24 inches long. And then it also says that it is marked at every 1 inch. So if you turn it over, every inch of this cable has a little silver line on it to mark where each inch is. And that could be really handy if you are measuring how wide something is when you just lay it flat. That would be super, super handy to not have to go find a ruler or a measuring tape to measure how wide your piece is. So the cable itself is nice quality, very flexible, pretty comparable to some of the other ones that I've tried, which I will again show you in just a minute. I just want to go through all the features of these needles first, and then we'll compare them. And just before we get to the interchangeable one, the interchangeable needle has a cable key, which is this little, it looks like a pin right here. You insert it into the hole in the cable, and then you use that as kind of leverage to loosen or tighten the needle tip onto the cable. And then you can also, if you need to pause and save your project for later and use these tips for something else, you can also take the tip, the needle tip, off of the cable, and then you can attach one of these end caps, which screws right on to the cable, like so. And then that makes sure that none of your stitches will fall off of your needle as you take those needle tips and then go use them for a different project. So this can be really, really handy if you only have one set of size 7 tips, for example, and you have 2 projects at the same time going on size 7 needles. So you can always just remove the tips and use them in another project. You don't have to buy multiples of each size. So one of the biggest pros about these interchangeable needles is that they have a swivel cable. So what this means is that instead of, for example, I will show you on these fixed needles, most interchangeable needles that I have tried, when you attach the cable moves with the needle, right? So when you turn the work and you kind of go like this, sometimes you have to just do a little bit of untwisting, especially if it's a longer cable. You sometimes have to do like a little bit of untwisting from one needle or the other to get the cable straightened out as you go on to work the next row. But these cables on these interchangeable needles are swivel cables. So I can turn the needle every which way and it won't come unscrewed because I haven't used that tightening key to loosen it. There's a swivel section right here where you can see the part where it's attached to the needle moves with the needle, but the cable is allowed to spin freely, which is awesome because then when you turn the work, it automatically untwists itself for you. You don't have to worry about, taking the needle and then untwisting any kinks in your cable as you are turning to work the next row. Now that's not the end of the world to have to untwist your cable, but it is really neat to have that feature in a needle where it does that for you so you don't have to, untangle yourself each time you turn and work the next row. So these interchangeable needles that I have right here are also a lace tip stainless steel needle and are very similar to these right here, except that they are interchangeable and they have this swivel cord. Now this cable also has the 1-inch marks on it as well, and it also has the writing on the back on the other end here. It tells you how long it will be once you attach it to the needles. It tells you that it's marked every 1 inch, and etc. So I've been kind of playing with these needles on this sample piece that is leftover yarn from my ultraviolet tea, which I just released. And I've got some stockinette stitch here, so some knit and purl. I've been working on both of those here, and I did a little bit of lace. And I really found that the lace tips made it a lot easier to insert into multiple stitches. So even though I'm on the purl side, I'm just going to work a few purl stitches and then we'll do maybe a purl 2 together or a knit 2 together, just to show you what that's like. So I really like how the tapered tips make it so much easier to insert into those 2 or even 3 stitches at once because the taper is so much thinner close to the tip, and it just gives you that room to insert into those 2 stitches, and you can see how easy that slides in. Now, if your stitches are super tight, then it's never going to be easy to insert into multiple stitches. But I imagine that this would also be handy any place that you're doing something like cables, where that the stitches are kind of, when they're crossed over each other and you have to work across those on the first row, and they're kind of, I don't know, a little bit tight and they're pulling on each other. This would probably also be really handy for cables to have that real thin tapered tip to get in and out of those difficult stitches. So I really think that the lace tip is a great choice, even if you're not going to be working lace, because it just glides in and out of the stitches so smoothly, especially with that slick stainless steel surface, and it just makes it so much easier anytime you're working decreases to just get the needle in and out of those stitches. So I'm just going to go across to the end of my row here, and then I will compare them to the other needles that I have, just to give you an idea of how they are similar to other brands or different from other brands. So these are the stainless steel needles from Knitter's Pride. What I have over here is a stainless steel needle from a different brand, and you may recognize this brand. They have a red cable on everything. And this was the first steel needle that I tried, and I didn't quite love it. It's not a bad needle. It's a good needle, but I didn't love it as much as I love some of the other needles that I have used in the past. So I haven't really used it very much, and I haven't reviewed it yet either. But one thing that I really noticed a difference in is the surface of this steel. The steel on this needle doesn't have as much glide to it as this one does, which I really, really love because I love a lot of glide on a needle. And so I wasn't totally impressed with these particular needles with the red cable, but I was really pleased with the glide on this one. So that is one thing that this needle has going for it, that I would choose this one over this particular steel needle. And another thing is that the cable on this one is a little thicker and it feels a little bit less flexible. Maybe that's just me, but I think it's a little bit less flexible than some of the other cables that I've tried. And I also don't love the tips on this one. If you compare the tips of these two needles, this one is a regular tip, this one is a lace tip. If you kind of hold that over the white so that you can see it more clearly, the one with the red cable has not only a shorter tapered tip, but it's also not as thin when you get to the very tip of that needle. Whereas this lace tip right here starts the taper further up and tapers in very gradually to a very, very small tip. And I think that's what makes it glide in and out of the stitches, especially multiple stitches, so easily. Now, the one slight drawback to having such a long taper on your tip, which really isn't a big deal, is that when you work your stitches, you do have to make sure that once you finish the stitch, you make sure that you have to slide it all the way past the taper to get it onto the straight part of the needle. So that does require slightly more motion with the technique that I use to make sure that it slides all the way past the tapered section onto the straight shaft of the needle. But that's really not that difficult to do, to just slide it back a little bit further, and it really makes up for it with the ease of inserting the needle. So I really don't mind that too much at all. So I should also point out here, one advantage of these steel needles is that the size here is not like painted on. I think it's etched or printed somehow onto the metal, but it's not like actual paint. Because I have tried some that have like the size marking and stuff painted or stamped onto the needle, and that can actually rub off over time. And I think it's really important to have a permanent marking on your needle that tells you what size it is, so you don't have to get a needle sizer every time to just know what size the needle is. It should be clearly stated on the needle. And on this needle it is. It says US 8, 5.0 millimeters, Knitter's Pride. And it's not painted on, which I really appreciate, because over time the ones that are painted on will rub off as you're knitting on them. So now let's compare to one of the other needles that I have also used a lot. These are my personal knitting needles that I have like a whole set of, and I use them for pretty much everything. These are the Knit Picks Options interchangeable needles, and these are made of laminated birch. Now these are the needles I use for probably 95% of my projects, and these are actually the same size as the steel needles right here. I do have them on a longer cord right now, but these are also a size 7, and you can see how hard to read the little engraved size marking is, but again, it's not painted and it won't come off, so I'd rather have it hard to read than something that would rub off. But these do not have a swivel cable. So these, you're left with the kinks in the cable, and you have to kind of just untwist it a little bit whenever you turn the work and work another row. It's not as much of a problem if you're doing something in the round, but when you do have to turn the work and you flip it over, then you have to do a little bit of untangling or untwisting there. But I wanted to compare the tips on these as well. So you can see how that the tip of this birch needle is, again, shorter. It's a much closer taper to the very tip, and it is not as thin at the very tip as the lace needle is. So if you kind of compare where the taper starts, the Knitter's Pride needle starts to taper about a 1/4 inch before the Knit Picks needle does. So the Knit Picks needle does not go in and out of multiple stitches as good as the steel one right here. So this needle is laminated birch, which I like for its surface, and it's very smooth and slick, but without being so overly slippery that everything just falls off the needle. But if you look at these two tips next to each other, the Knit Picks needle switches material right here before it tapers down to the screw-on area right here. Now, it does have to do that. That's not an option because it is wood and you can't make a little screw-on thingy down here with wood. It has to be metal. But there is a very, very, very faint line right here that you can kind of feel just a little bit. And it's not usually an issue because most of the time the stitches will go right over that. But if you're working with a real thin yarn, sometimes they do get just a little bit caught right there. Whereas the Knitter's Pride needle does not have that. The only place where stitches could get caught is right here where it joins the cable, which is very unlikely because as you're bringing them up off of the cord, it's just very gradually getting slightly thicker right here, and then it comes up all the way to the full thickness of the needle right here. So that is one thing I do like about this, is that it's all one material, and it does not have any kind of change in material before you taper down to the cable. And another thing that these don't have is the markings on the cable. It's a very flexible cable, and it does not get like stuck in a coil like a lot of the really inexpensive aluminum fixed circulars do, but it does not swivel like the steel one, which I really do like that it does swivel on this one. So surface wise, I do actually think that the steel is slightly slicker than the laminated birch, which is, like I said, one of the most important things that I look for because I really do prefer a slippery needle. And that is probably one of the biggest differences between these two, besides the swivel cord, is the surface. It's not a drastic change between the birch and the steel, but there is just a little bit more slipperiness to this than there is in the birch needle. So I think the surface of the needle is great. The tips are awesome because you can get them in and out of multiple stitches, which can be really tricky, especially if you are working a lot of decreases. And overall, I think these are just a great set of needles. Now, if I were to order these, I would probably recommend most to go for the interchangeable needles because you can switch out the length of the cords. And you don't have to worry about, oh, well, I have a size 8 in a 24 inch, but I don't have a size 8 in a 36 inch or whatever. So you can just switch them out with the different cables. And I really like that swivel cord on the interchangeable ones. So if I were to give a recommendation on which ones I like better, I would say I would definitely recommend, if you're going to order these, to order the interchangeable ones, because I really prefer interchangeable needles in general and recommend them over fixed needles. You just get a better value for your money because you can switch them out with all the different cable lengths, and you don't ever have to worry about having multiple needles in the same size just to have a different length of the cable. So overall, I think these are a great option if you are looking for a set of interchangeable circulars. The fixed circulars are great too. I don't have anything against fixed circulars. I just think that a set of interchangeable circular knitting needles will pretty much cover every possible need that you would ever have in knitting needles. Because even if you are knitting something like a sock, you can always just get a really long cable and attach them to your interchangeable circulars. And then you can just do magic loop and loop that extra cable length out of the way and work on small circumference items without double pointed needles. You can work back and forth in rows on flat pieces without having to buy straight needles. So if you're looking for a good quality set of interchangeable circular knitting needles that will cover pretty much everything you need, I would definitely recommend these Knitter's Pride needles from the Mindful collection. And even if you don't knit lace, the lace tips are really nice. So even if you don't plan on knitting lace, anytime you're working into a tight or difficult stitch, this lace tip can make it a little bit easier to get in and out of those stitches. So I've really enjoyed working with these needles. I will definitely continue to use them in my projects. They will go in my needle case with the needles that I actually use, because I do have some needles that I don't ever use that I've tested and didn't really like so well. So these will definitely be among the needles that I use in my projects often. And I really like the feel of the needles. They perform very well. The surface is very slick. That lace tip, like I said, is awesome. And that swivel cable never hurt either. It's really handy. And I don't know, I really like the feel and performance of these needles. Definitely recommend them. If you are interested in giving them a try, then go ahead and visit the link in the description box down below to visit Laurel Hill online. And you can order all of the needles from the Mindful collection and get your hands on a set of these really nice quality steel needles. So thanks so much to Laurel Hill Online for sending me these needles to try out, and I hope you found this video helpful. If there's anything else you'd like to know about these needles, just let me know and I will be happy to help. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Let me know what your favorite type of knitting needle is in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, making sure you click the little bell next to the subscribe button to be notified of new videos. Thanks for watching.